Chapter 2. And there began a new life, infinitely strange and varied, in which the days rushed by at a terrifying speed. Now I see it as a grim story, the creation of a sincere artist with a passionate devotion to the truth, however cruel. As I try to bring the past to life, I find it hard to believe that it all really happened. That dreary life was so full of violence that I would even like to question or gloss over much of it. But the truth is nobler than self-pity, and in fact I am not writing about myself alone, but about that close-knit, suffocating little world of pain and suffering where the ordinary Russian man in the street used to live, and where he lives to this day. Grandfather's house was filled with a choking fog of mutual hostility. It poisoned the grown-ups and even infected the children. Later on, grandmother told me that Mother had arrived just at the time her brothers were continually pestering her father to divide up the estate. Mother's unexpected return only sharpened their desire to get what they thought was their rightful share. They were afraid that Mother would ask for a dowry, to which she was entitled, but which grandfather had withheld because, as he put it, she had gone her own way and married against his wishes. My uncles thought the dowry should go to them. For a long time they had been having a long and violent arguments as to which of them should open a dye works in the town across the Oka River in the Cunavino district. Soon after our arrival, a fierce quarrel started in the kitchen. The uncles, without any warning, suddenly leapt to their feet, leaned across the table, and started howling and roaring at Grandfather, shaking themselves and baring their teeth like dogs. Grandfather retaliated by banging his soup spoon on the table. Then he went red in the face and screeched like a cock. "I'll cut you all off without a penny." Her face twisted with pain, Grandmother said, "Let them have the lot, then they'll leave you alone." "Shut up, I know you're on their side," roared Grandfather, his eyes flashing. I thought it very strange that someone so small could make such a deafening noise. Mother left the table slowly, went over to the window, and turned her back on everyone. Suddenly Uncle Mikhail gave his brother a backhander on the face. The injured brother howled with pain and started grappling with Uncle Mikhail. They both rolled around the floor, groaning and swearing. The children started crying. Aunt Natalia, who was pregnant at the time, gave a despairing moan. Mother took hold of her behind the arms and dragged her off somewhere. Yevgenia, our nanny, a cheerful, pock-faced woman, chased the children out of the kitchen. Tables were set flying. Siganuk, a young broad-shouldered apprentice in the dye works, sat himself astride Uncle Mikhail's back, while our foreman, Grigory Ivanovich, who was bald and had a beard and wore black glasses, calmly bound his arms with a towel. Uncle Mikhail groaned terribly as he stuck his neck out and rubbed his black beard on the floor. Grandfather ran around the table, miserably shrieking, "Call yourself brothers, your own flesh and blood?" Right at the beginning of the battle, I had taken fright and leapt up onto the shelf above the stove. From this place of refuge, I looked down with amazement at Grandmother washing the blood from Uncle Yakov's cut face with water from a copper basin. My uncle was crying and stamping his feet, while Grandmother said wearily, "Savages, that's what you are. Take a grip on yourselves." Grandfather pulled his torn shirt over his shoulders and bellowed at her. "Old bitch, it's wild animals you've given me, not sons." When Uncle Yakov had gone, Grandmother crept into a corner. She was shaking like a leaf and howling. "Holy Mother of God, please make my children see reason." Grandfather stood at her side, surveyed the table, which was littered with a mess of smashed cookery and overturned dishes, and said quietly, "Mind they don't work Bavaria to death. Anything that's decent they'll drag down into the dirt." "For God's sake, stop talking like that. Let's have your shirt and I'll patch it up." She squeezed his head between her open palms and kissed him on the forehead. He looked so small next to her, and his face bumped against her shoulder. "That's all I can do now, divide it between them." "Yes, that's what you've got to do." They went on talking for a long time. At first, it was friendly. But then grandfather started scraping his foot over the floor like a cock impatient for a fight, and he poked his finger threateningly at grandmother and whispered loud enough for me to hear, don't I know you by now? You feel more for them, that dear little Jesuit Mishka of yours, as for Yashka. He's nothing more than a Freemason. You'll see, they'll drink it all away." I turned clumsily on my perch on the stove and knocked an iron over. It clattered down the small ladder and fell into the sink with a loud splash. Grandfather sprang onto the ladder, hauled me down, and stared me straight in the eyes as if he'd never seen me before. "Who put you up there? Your mother?" I went up myself. "You're lying." "No, I'm not. I was frightened." He pushed me aside, giving me a gentle little slap on the forehead. Just like his father. "Clear off." I was only too glad to get out of the kitchen. I could see all too clearly that grandfather was in the habit of following me with his clever, sharp-sighted green eyes, and for this I was afraid of him. I can remember that I was forever trying to hide from those all-devouring eyes. To me, grandfather was a wicked person. He was sarcastic and offensive. Whenever he spoke to anyone, he was sarcastic and offensive whenever he spoke to anyone, and was always trying to provoke people. "Ooh, what a lot," he would often exclaim. That long, drawn-out ooh never failed to make me feel depressed and cold all over. In the afternoon tea break, when grandfather, my uncles, and the workmen came into the kitchen from the dyeing shop, tired out, with hands reddened by sandalwood and burned with vitriol, and their hair tied up in ribbons so that they all looked like the rather sinister icons in the kitchen corner. At that dangerous hour, grandfather would come and sit opposite me and make all the other children jealous by giving most of his attention to me. He had a sharp-edged, angular appearance, finely molded and well-proportioned. His embroidered satin waistcoat was old and threadbare, and his cotton shirt all crumpled. His trousers sported large patches at the knees, but in spite of this he looked well-dressed, cleaner and smarter than his sons, with their jackets, false shirt fronts, and silk cravats. Not long after our arrival, he made me learn my prayers by heart. The other children were older and already learning how to read and write with the deacon from the Church of the Assumption. Its golden dome could be seen from our windows. Aunt Natalia used to give me lessons at home. She was a timid, quietish woman with a face like a child's, and eyes so transparent I always imagined I could see right through them to the back of her head. I loved to gaze into her eyes for a long time without turning away or blinking. This made her screw up her eyes and move her head away and ask me in a voice almost as soft as a whisper, "Please repeat after me, 'Our Father, which art in heaven.'" If I asked, "What does art mean?" she would look around in fright and say sternly, "Don't you ask now, that only makes it worse. Just repeat after me, 'Our Father.'" Well, why asking questions should make things worse worried me. The word art took on a mysterious meaning, and I repeated it wrongly whenever I had the chance. Which part? Which heart? And so on. But my aunt, so pale she seemed to be fading away, would patiently correct me. "Now just you say which art." She seemed as difficult to understand as the words she was trying to teach me. This annoyed me and made it hard work for me to memorize my prayers. One day grandfather asked, "Well, what have you been up to today?" "Playing in the street, I bet. I can see from the bump on your forehead. It's not clever getting mixed up in fights. Can you recite the Lord's Prayer?" My aunt said in a soft voice, "He's got a bad memory." Grandfather laughed cheerily, raised his reddish eyebrows. "In that case, he deserves a good hiding." He turned to me again and asked, "Did your father beat you?" Not understanding what he was talking about, I didn't reply, and Mother intervened. "No, Maxim never beat him, and he didn't let me either." "Why not?" "He used to say it never did any good." What a fool he was, that Maxim. God forgive me for speaking ill of the dead. These words were spoken in an angry, clipped voice. They deeply hurt me, and grandfather noticed it. "Stop sulking, you should see yourself." He stroked his silver red hair and added, "On Saturday I'm going to flog Sashka because of the thimble." "What's flogging?" I asked. Everyone laughed, and grandfather said, "Just you wait and see." As I hid in my corner, I thought, flogging must mean the same as unstitching cloth before it's dyed. Whipping and beating mean the same. Horses, cats, and dogs are beaten. And in Astrakhan, policemen beat the Persians. I'd seen it with my own eyes. But I'd never seen small children treated in this way, and although grandfather used to smack the others on the head or neck, it never seemed to worry them at all, and all they did was scratch the place afterwards. More than once I asked them, "Did it hurt?" And they always courageously replied, "No, I didn't feel a thing." I was acquainted with every detail of the tempestuous thimble story. One evening, about an hour before supper, the uncles and the foreman were sewing up pieces of dyed material into one length and pinning cardboard labels on it. Deciding to play a joke on Grigory, who was half blind, Uncle Mikhail told his 9-year-old nephew to heat Grigory's thimble over a candle. Sasha gripped the thimble in some pincers used for snuffing the candles and waited until it was red hot, put it down near Grigory's hand without him seeing, and hid behind the stove. At that moment, who should come in but grandfather, who sat down and put his finger in the red-hot thimble. I remember escaping from the uproar into the kitchen and seeing grandfather clutching his ear with his burnt fingers and comically hopping and shouting, "What infidel did that?" Uncle Mikhail, bent over the table, was chasing the thimble with his finger and blowing on it. Grigory went on sewing as if nothing had happened. Shadows from the fire flickered over his vast bald head. Uncle Yakov ran to see if he could help, then hid behind the stove, where he laughed quietly to himself. Grandmother took a moist potato and began grating it. "It's Sasha's work," Uncle Mikhail said suddenly. "That's a lie," retorted Uncle Yakov, springing from his hiding place. In one corner, his son could be heard crying and protesting. "Papa, don't believe him. He told me to do it." The uncles started swearing at each other. All at once, grandfather calmed down, pressed the bits of potato to his finger, and left the room without saying a word, taking me with him by the scruff of the neck. Everyone blamed Uncle Mikhail. My question during tea, would he get a flogging, was perfectly natural in the circumstances. "He deserves it," snarled grandfather, looking at me out the corner of his eye. Uncle Mikhail thumped the table and shouted to Mother, "If you don't take that brat of yours out of here, I'll bash his face in." "Just you lay one finger on him," replied Mother. No one said a word. Mother had a knack of using short words as defensive weapons for warding off people, repelling them, and making them feel powerless. It was obvious to me everyone was afraid of her. Even grandfather spoke to her differently and in a more subdued voice. This pleased me, and I used to boast about it to my cousins. "My mother's the strongest," and they didn't dispute it. But an event that took place the following Saturday completely changed my attitude to Mother. By then I had managed to get myself into serious trouble. The skill with which the grown-ups made the cloth change color used to intrigue me very much. They would take a yellow piece of cloth and soak it in black water, and it would come out deep blue, or indigo, as it was called. Then they would rinse out a gray piece in rusty-colored water, and it would come out Bordeaux claret. It was all so simple and mystifying. I wanted to try my hand at dyeing as well, and told Uncle Yakov's Sasha about it. He was a serious boy, always tried to please the grown-ups, was polite to everyone, and ready to do whatever anyone asked of him. The grown-ups praised his intelligence and obedience, but grandfather would squint at him and say, "You little crawler." Thin and swarthy-faced, with eyes bulging like a crab's, Sasha spoke quietly, softly, and the words seemed to choke him. He was always looking around furtively, which made one think he was on the point of dashing off to hide somewhere. The hazel pupils of his eyes only moved when he got excited, and then they moved in unison with the whites. I didn't like him at all. I far preferred the lazy Sasha, Uncle Mikhail's son. He was a quiet boy with sad eyes and a pleasant smile, whom I didn't see much of, and who was the image of his sweet, gentle mother. He had ugly, protruding teeth that grew in a double row in the upper jaw. This worried him a great deal, and he was perpetually fingering them and trying to pull out the back row. He would let anybody touch them. He would let anybody touch them.